welcome back. Well, a diagnosis is usually seen as the first step to recovery, but can it do more harm than good? Well, that's what our next guest has been trying to find out.
Yes, here to discuss her newest book, The Age of Diagnosis, is author and neurologist Suzanne O'Sullivan. Good morning to you, Suzanne. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. Can you tell us a little about your book, Age of Diagnosis, and why you decided to write it?
Yeah, so I've been a doctor for nearly 35 years now. And in recent years, I've noticed that I'm seeing more and more people with lots more medical labels coming to me, and often they're very, very young people. And what it often feels like to me is if they're accruing medical labels, but they don't seem to be getting any healthier. And that's been a cause of great concern. I think what's happening in medicine, in society now, is we are trying to correct a history of neglect. So we used to fail to notice children who were struggling in school, or people with mental health problems didn't feel able to talk about it, or people with physical problems went to their doctor too late. We've been correcting that by recognizing things in milder and milder forms, but I fear we might be overcorrecting and beginning to turn healthy people into patients now.
Yet you say it's a medical label epidemic. Explain to us exactly that.
Yeah, so let me give you kind of an example. So once upon a time, diabetes used to be defined by a certain level of fasting blood glucose. And then, a committee decided, hey, if we adjust that level to be a little bit more generous, so it includes more people, and we create a thing called pre-diabetes, which means you don't have diabetes, but maybe you're on the edge of getting it, that we'll capture more people with this disorder and help them. The result of that change meant that if you applied the new diagnostic criteria, a half of all Chinese adults would be pre-diabetic, and a third of people in countries like UK, Ireland, America would be pre-diabetic. So we are kind of adjusting diagnostic concepts to create huge populations of people who now have disease labels attached to them. Some of those people will certainly be helped by that. But my question is, how many of them didn't need the label to start with?
But Suzanne, is it not better that you get, say, you might develop diabetes, so if you do certain things now and change your lifestyle, you won't develop it. So is that not better?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's how we focus, how we justify this. It's all very well intentioned, and we're always focused on the person that we've saved. So if you diagnose lots and lots of people with abnormal cells that could potentially lead to cancer, you will save one life from something like cancer, but you could potentially overtreat 10 other people. We think about the person we save, but we don't think enough about the 10 people who got treatment, which is often, if it's just lifestyle changes, that's not so bad. But if we're giving drugs to people for hypertension, or we're treating people for cancer, or we're labeling, young people as being neurodivergently abnormal in some way, what is the impact on them? You've got the side effect of the drugs, which is one concern. But my bigger concern is what happens psychologically to a person when you tell them they're not healthy. A person who's told they're a patient can start behaving like a patient. It also has lots of really practical implications. If somebody has a medical diagnosis, it affects their insurance, it affects mortgages, life insurance, travel insurance. We're thinking a lot about the person we save, which is incredibly important. My fear is that we're not thinking quite enough about what happens to a person when you medicalize their life.
And Suzanne, you refer to a specific case study, don't you, within the book, of this lady who basically just isolated herself. Tell us about that after her diagnosis.
So I'm not sure which case you're referring to.
Did she not have? Did she have Huntington's disease?
Yes. So yeah, she didn't isolate herself. But I think so Huntington's disease is a disease that causes progressive neurodegenerative decline. Now, I don't expect many people in your audience to be affected by it, but her story could be relevant to everyone. So this was a lady who, when she was 28 and pregnant with her first child, she learned that her mother had Huntington's disease. Now, the thing about Huntington's is if your mother or your parent has it, you've got a 50-50 chance of getting it. So what it meant to this lady when she learned her mother was diagnosed, it meant she immediately had a 50% chance that she was going to get this very, very serious and distressing neurodegenerative condition. It also meant that her unborn child went from being a perfectly healthy baby to being one that had a 25% chance of getting Huntington's. Now, you can imagine that sort of impact that this had on this lady. It was really psychologically devastating to her. Now, she could have immediately had a genetic test that told her whether or not she would be affected. She chose not to, a common decision of people in this position, because they know that if you get that positive test back, you will immediately it will change your relationship with your body immediately. It'll immediately turn you into a patient who is waiting to get sick. So this lady didn't test. So but she tried to get on with her life. What she was choosing was to be a mother who had any type of future, who could enjoy motherhood, whose children were not sort of doomed to also get this condition. But what happened over the next kind of 10, 20 years was she became so convinced that she had the abnormal gene that she began noticing symptoms all over her body. She started bumping into things, forgetting things, getting flustered. She saw all the symptoms in herself that her mother had had, to the point that she actually became quite disabled by this, until she realized, I have to take the test, get the diagnosis so that my children know, what sort of future is ahead of them. When she got the test, she found out she didn't have the gene. The test was negative. The point being that just believing herself to be at risk of this disease produced all the symptoms in her, even though she was never destined to get it.
But
now, when a lot of people hear that story, they say, "Don't you wish she tested
earlier?
20 years?" Yes, but this is precisely why people in this position don't test. You've got a 50-50 chance of being positive. If she had tested positive, she would have developed all those symptoms more quickly. She would have been disabled for the next 20 years, even though the disease was not destined to happen for 20 years.
Okay.
That's what a disease label does to you, is it focuses you on your body in a worrying way and can produce symptoms. So there's a lot to lose by testing positive.
Yeah, I mean, look, you speak a lot in the book about autism and ADHD, and we speak a lot about autism on this show, and even last week, the rise of autism in Ireland is huge, especially among school children. And you're sort of saying that that's being overdiagnosed, and we should really only diagnose those who truly need it?
Yeah, so I think it's important I say what overdiagnosis is. So, because I think people hear the word overdiagnosis and they think, oh, she's saying there's nothing wrong with this, that everything's fine. That's not what I'm saying. So, overdiagnosis doesn't mean a diagnosis is wrong necessarily, but rather there's a point in diagnosis where being diagnosed isn't beneficial to you. Perhaps your symptoms are more in the borderline zone, and the harm of being labeled as a patient is greater than the benefits of diagnosis. So what's happened with autism over the last sort of 70 or so years is we've completely changed the definition of what autism is. So in 1940s, autism was described as extreme autistic aloneness. So someone who has zero interest in people, a very disabled person. And realizing that if we adjusted that description of autism gradually, we might recognize milder sufferers and help more people. That description has been adjusted and adjusted and adjusted to the point now that the diagnosis can be made in people whose symptoms are relatively minimal compared to the old-fashioned version.
Yeah,
but
and
Suzanne,
we do that to help people.
Sorry, yeah, exactly. Sorry to cut across you, but a lot of people say, especially adults who perhaps are getting their children assessed, and then they realise, oh, actually, I have ADHD, or something else that perhaps is on the spectrum. It actually makes a lot of their life make sense then.
And easier for them.
Exactly, and
they're
perhaps,
understanding.
And perhaps a sense of community going, okay, now I get it.
Yeah, no, I totally understand that. But in young people in particular, I think what I need people to understand really is that a diagnosis is not inert. So yes, I do understand you get a diagnosis and it provides an explanation. And in school children, for example, it can result in, special accommodations, etc. But at this milder end of the spectrum where the disability is milder, so a person has been managing quite well, you have a really big risk of what we call the labeling effect or the nocebo effect. So this means that a person can, we're all familiar with the placebo effect, where if you believe a tablet will work, it might work because through that belief. If you believe that you have a medical condition that presents in a certain way, you can inadvertently conform to that. So imagine a 14-year-old told that they have this social communication problem called autism. They may begin to focus on the negative aspects of themselves, focus on the things they cannot do. They may expect less of themselves. Other people may expect less of them. So the big concern is that you can really affect the identity formation of a young person if you give them this label of neurodevelopmentally abnormal. I'm not suggesting that we go to a situation where we say, hey, these children have nothing wrong with them, let's ignore them. What I'm suggesting is that we should be able to recognize a struggling child and help them without giving them a medical label that implies they have a problem that cannot be overcome.
Yeah, very interesting. And I'm sure lots of people, lots of our viewers in this morning would have some opinions on this, and we'd love to hear from you. 0896 111 111. The Age of Diagnosis, Suzanne O'Sullivan. Thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Thanks, Suzanne. Lots more still to come on Ireland AM.
We'll see you after this short break.